Good afternoon, and welcome to True Crime Mysteries. If you're new to the channel, hello and welcome, and if you're returning, welcome back. Today we're discussing some more heartbreaking stories of Tinder dates that took a murderous turn. Let's get into it. With over 75 million monthly active users, Tinder has revolutionized how people meet from anywhere in the world. And as you're watching this, millions of people are probably swiping left and right, looking for their match made in heaven. And although matches on Tinder have the potential to blossom into something romantic, some take a dark turn and end tragically. Number 1. Mieke Oort. On the night of March 5th, 2022, police were called because of a house fire in the center of Leeuwarden, the Frisian capital in the Netherlands. The fire was quickly extinguished, but officers found the body of a 21-year-old woman in one of the apartments above a tattoo parlor. She was stabbed multiple times with a sharp object. The woman was Mieke Oort, an American student who was studying leisure and events management at NHL Stenden University of Applied Sciences. Mieke was of Dutch heritage and was excited about her new life in the Netherlands. She had recently moved into the apartment, which was around 90 minutes away from Amsterdam, following a breakup with her boyfriend of 2 years. Mieke had recently been matched with a new date on Tinder. He reportedly became quickly violent and started stalking her after she told him she didn't want to continue seeing him because she got back together with her ex. That Tinder date revealed to be 27-year-old Thomas R., who was caught by the German police a few hours after the murder. He was found in Leer, a small town across the Dutch borders. He was turned in by his parents, who alerted local police after he contacted them while fleeing, confessing to them what he'd done. They told law enforcement they were perplexed by their son's behavior and were left deeply shaken after receiving his call. Police reports showed that Thomas first threw an incendiary bomb at the apartment building, sparking the fire. They suspected he started the fire to lure the residents out. A fight broke out in the stairwell between him and 2 male residents who were left mildly injured. He then climbed the stairs and attacked Mieke in her apartment, stabbing her to death. In an interview with a Dutch newspaper, Michael, Mieke's ex-boyfriend, said that they were thinking about rekindling their relationship, which he believed may have sent Thomas over the edge. He'd started stalking her and even installed a GPS tracker on her bicycle to keep tabs on her. He also harassed her by sending intimidating messages via WhatsApp.
She was my baby sister. We don't really know how to cope with it.
The brutal crime has devastated Mieke Oort's family. Tonight from the Netherlands, her sister's remembering the 21-year-old who was studying in a city about an hour and a half outside Amsterdam.
She had just so much more to give. And she had just a lot of love for everyone.
Thomas R. is now awaiting extradition to the Netherlands, where he will likely be charged with Mieke Oort's murder. Number 2. Lauren Smith Fields. On the evening of December 13th, 2021, Chantel Smith and her son went to check on her 23-year-old daughter, Lauren. Chantel was concerned because Lauren wasn't returning their calls or replying to texts, which was unusual. When they arrived at her apartment in Bridgeport, Connecticut, they found a strange note on the apartment door that said, "If you're looking for Lauren, please contact this number." The number belonged to Lauren's landlord, who notified them of her death and gave them the number of the detective assigned to the case. Chantel was in shock and couldn't believe that she was learning of her daughter's death from the landlord. Lauren had died the night before, and law enforcement had never bothered to notify next of kin of her death. According to Chantel, her son spoke with the detective, and he mentioned that Lauren had been on a date the night of her death with an older man she met on Bumble, a dating app similar to Tinder. The detectives told him that they didn't need to worry about him because he was a really nice guy. The really nice guy was a 37-year-old man named Matthew LaFountain. He was the last person to see Lauren alive, yet he hasn't been named as a person of interest, nor was he taken into custody for questioning. In the police report, LaFountain accounted that he recalled arriving at Lauren's apartment around 9:30 p.m. the night before. He said that the two had matched on Bumble 3 days prior and they'd been chatting. He claimed that Lauren had asked him for $40 to get her nails done, and told him to meet her at her place with a bottle of tequila. LaFountain proceeded to say that they drank tequila, played games, then had food together before starting to watch a movie. At one point, he said Lauren went to the bathroom to throw up, and in another, she went outside to get something from her brother. When she returned to the apartment, he said that she went directly to the bathroom and stayed there for 10-15 minutes, and when she came back, LaFountain said that she fell asleep on the couch during the movie, and he carried her into the bedroom, where he fell asleep next to her. He claimed that he woke up at 3 a.m. to use the washroom and heard her snoring. Then he woke again at 6:30 a.m. and saw blood dripping onto the bed, which was coming out of her nose. He checked her pulse and found she wasn't breathing, and that's when he called 911. The first responders to the scene wrote in the incident report that LaFountain was frantic and visibly shaken. The weirdest part was that police never contacted the family, nor did they immediately examine the scene. No one in the Smithfield family was notified of her death until Chantel went to her daughter's apartment and was informed by the landlord. According to Lauren's brother, when he and his family walked into the apartment to gather Lauren's belongings, they found bottles of alcohol, flipped plates of food, a blood-stained sheet, a sedative pill, and a used condom. According to the Smithfield's family lawyer, Darnell Clausland, no evidence has been submitted to the forensic lab. He said that the family was planning to sue the city for failing to investigate Lauren's death properly. On January 21, 2022, the family lawyer issued a notice of claim announcing that they intended to sue the Bridgeport Police Department for its poor handling of the case. They believe the police department was racially insensitive as they didn't take Lauren's death seriously. On January 23rd, which would have been Lauren's 24th birthday, activists and community members joined Lauren's family in a march outside the Bridgeport Police Department, where they demanded justice for the young woman.
The family's last contact with police was on January 4th at headquarters with their attorney.
What I believe is that the police failed to collect and preserve that environment from the first day.
The attorney has now filed a notice of claim to sue Bridgeport for negligence, claiming key evidence was not initially submitted to the state lab.
I feel like because he's a white guy and she's a black girl, it's just almost like they just thrown it under the rug.
That night she was silenced, so now we are her voice. But we're here, and we're fighting for her.
On January 24th, the autopsy results were publicly revealed. The medical examiner concluded that Lauren had died of acute intoxication due to the combined effects of fentanyl, promethazine, hydroxyzine, and alcohol. Her death was ruled an accident. Crosland, the family lawyer, commented that the toxicology report made her death look even more like a murder. Her family and friends said that Lauren didn't do drugs, rarely drank, and regularly went to the gym and took care of herself. Her family believes that she was drugged and assaulted and died from a lethal combination of drugs. After that, the city's mayor, Joe Ganim, announced that the Office of Internal Affairs would conduct a full and fair investigation into how the police handled Lauren's death. 6 weeks after Lauren's death, after a growing outcry to properly investigate the case, Bridgeport Police said that its Narcotics and Vice Division, along with the DEA, were finally going to investigate if any crimes were committed. Additionally, there have been reports that LaFountain may have had a personal connection with one of the lead detectives. It was reported that a detective arrived at 3:30 a.m. prior to the 911 call, and there are allegations that this detective may have assisted in covering up what happened to Lauren. That detective was subsequently investigated by Internal Affairs and suspended. Another detective was also suspended pending the results of an internal investigation. They were suspended in January 2022, and as of this recording, there hasn't been an update on this case, but let me know if you want me to follow it. Number 3, Isimemen Etute. It was in April 2021 when 18-year-old Isimemen Etute was scrolling through Tinder. He was a student athlete for Virginia Tech University playing on their football team. He matched with a 21-year-old woman named Angie Renee, and the two arranged to meet at Angie's apartment, where the two arranged to have intimate relations on April 10th. He stated that when he arrived at the apartment, it seemed sketchy. It was really dark, and his date wouldn't show her face. Regardless, the two achieved the objective of the evening. Weeks later, Isimemen was talking to one of his teammates, and his teammate asked if he had met Angie. They had also matched on Tinder, and Angie said that she and Isimemen had met up, and he wanted to confirm. His teammate suspected that Angie was catfishing on the app and perhaps wasn't who they were saying they were. When the two discussed a plan to figure out who Angie was, Isimemen reached out to Angie and set up another date, and he went with two other friends to her apartment on May 31st. His friends waited outside while Isimemen went inside with Angie. Similar to the first time he went to the apartment, it was dark, and Angie was wearing a hoodie and sweatpants. Again, he couldn't see her face. According to him, he confronted Angie and discovered Angie was a middle-aged man. During the confrontation, the two began scuffling, and Isimemen stated that during the fight, the other man began reaching between his mattress, and he assumed that he was going for a firearm. He then started to punch the man in the face multiple times and ran out of the apartment. The man was discovered the following day by his brother and was later identified as 40-year-old Jerry Smith. He had severe blunt force trauma and had died from injuries sustained in the beating. Smith had been using photographs he found online to meet young men for months. The real Angie Renee was an ER physician and also a graduate of Virginia Tech, and she had no idea her photo was being used on Tinder. It didn't take long for law enforcement to track down Isimemen and his friends. He had been very open with law enforcement about what had happened. At the time he was being interviewed, he didn't know Smith had died and had assumed the man was pressing assault charges against him. He told the police officer he felt violated and said in the interview, quote, "I was in shock, in disbelief that someone had tricked me and lied to me." He told law enforcement that he'd been scared and didn't know why this person had lied or what their motive was behind luring him into his apartment, and when he thought he was going for a weapon, he panicked. He felt he was in the fight of his life. Police later determined that there was a weapon between the mattresses, though not a firearm, there was a knife. Isimemen was later arrested and charged with murder and pleaded not guilty. He faced 40 years in prison if convicted, and the trial began May 25, 2022. It was a relatively short trial, only 3 days. Isimemen, during trial, he seemed remorseful for his actions, and his statements of events that took place at night never really changed or shifted, and his lawyer kept with the defense that he'd been lured into the apartment under false pretenses, and when he discovered that Angie was not the person he thought they were, he panicked. When he thought that this person, who was ultimately not who they said they were, was potentially reaching for what he believed was a weapon, he fought for his life. The prosecution claimed that Isimemen went to the apartment for the purpose of attacking Smith. They stated that the beating Smith received was well in excess of what he would have needed to get out of the apartment, and if he felt he was under threat, why hadn't he called the police? Isimemen had stated that Smith had been alive when he left the apartment, which was confirmed by forensic evidence. Though they couldn't determine exactly when he had died, there was blood spatter evidence that showed he was breathing after the attack. His defense team hammered that Isimemen was 18, that he'd never been in trouble before, didn't have a history of violence, and was a victim of sexual assault. Reluctant to call the police likely stemmed from where he grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, where he'd experienced seeing a lot of crime. He told a story on the stand of his grandparents experiencing 2 violent robberies and saying that they started sleeping with firearms nearby, and many people he knew kept weapons near their beds. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before coming to a verdict of not guilty. Isimemen was released following the verdict. After his initial arrest, he was held in jail pending the trial results. He had been suspended from school and from the football team he played for. His lawyer made a statement to the media following his release, quote, "He's focusing now, I think, on trying to get his life back together and trying to see what he can do to get re-enrolled in university and hopefully be able to pursue college football, which he loves so much." This was a complicated case, and before we end the video, I just want to add some things. While Jerry Smith's death was initially investigated as a hate crime, there was no evidence to suggest that he was trans or identified as a woman. There was no evidence that this was a hate crime. Jerry appeared to be very purposely misrepresenting himself as a woman in order to have sexual relations with people who didn't know he was a middle-aged man, which is sexual assault. From what we know of this case, Smith was a serial predator of young men. Well, that is where we're going to end this video. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you like this content and what I do over here, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss my next upload. If you could give this video a like if you thought the content was interesting, that would be great as it helps the channel to grow. We also have channel membership or Patreon if you want to get more behind the scene content as well as exclusive content or just to support the channel. In the description box of this video, you will also find links to all my socials to connect with me, as well as other goodies. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you on the next one. Bye for now.